Welcome back to the Horror Master YouTube channel. Welcome back to episode number 11. Yeah, can't believe it. 11 episodes already, which funny enough, 11 is my lucky number. But again, guys, episode number 11, which I cannot believe we've been doing this for 11 episodes, which my god, I think my mind would have gone crazy by this point in time and doing a series this long. Kind of learned from my mistakes when I did the Halloween series back in August when I was doing an episode per day, which that was a daunting task. So in this series, I decided to kind of make it more a weekly thing, but who knows? Maybe I might do something of that caliber in October this year. But regardless of that, we're going to episode number 11, and we're going to be tackling our first live album. Yeah, not many live albums that the album covers and considered controversial that I'm aware of. Like as I mentioned before, I'm still doing research. A lot of albums that to me might not be considered controversial, but in one point in time they might have been considered controversial. And in this case, we're going to be tackling a live album from one of the biggest German thrash metal bands that has come out of the German scene. Of course, I am talking about the almighty Sodom, with their first live album, Moral Ways of Life, released October 1st, 1988 by Steelhammer slash SPV Records. So for those people who don't know Sodom is a German thrash metal band who was part of the big tectonic German thrash metal bands, of course, with bands like Creator, Tankard, and Destruction. Basically, the German big four of thrash metal in that perspective. But Sodom is regarded as being one of the key bands that influenced both thrash, a bit of black and death metal into what will later become of course, the Gothenburg sound, the Swedish sound of death metal and black metal. And of course, a lot of people think that Sodom originally started as a black metal band, which, if you listen to the Sign of Evil EP, you can kind of see why people, and even to some extent, even Obsessed by Crew to the first studio album, kind of people why they thought that Sodom was a black metal band, which in the roots they're a thrash metal band, of course, with Persecution Mania and Agent Orange later on, and has been a more consistent band alongside Creator, which personally, out of the big four of German thrash, Creator is my favorite, next to Sodom and Destruction, and of course at the bottom Tankard. But not to mention also Exhumer and Holy Moses are two bands that need to be mentioned when it comes to, I guess, the big German thrash bands of the 80s, early 90s. So, More Ways of Life, Sodom, it's a live album, their first live album, and you can easily find the live album in person. Like, you can go on YouTube and find the live album as they actually performing songs from, of course, In the Silent Evil and Obsessed by Cruelty. If I'm not mistaken, I think there's only two albums that came out at that time. Oh no, actually, and Persecution Mania, yeah, I couldn't remember, yeah, and Persecution Mania. So pretty much the first two albums and the first EP. Now, the reason why this album cover was so controversial, I mean, you can kind of see why I've been putting it the entire time, was of course of the image, which is always the main thing with this album covers. So, as you can see, this album cover is been a bit more, out there than most album covers. Not because it's a gory album, not because it is a blasphemous album, because it shows a lot of, I don't want to say nudity, but a lot of debauchery. Of course, this album cover is mostly based around the ancient times of Romans and the Greeks, where there was a lot of wild parties. Of course, in the age of Caligula, amongst others. Of course, you can see in this album cover there's a lot of, you can say orgies with men and woman, woman and woman, man and man. Or in some cases, you can kind of see right in the middle, you can kind of see an image of a man with a goat. Yeah, you can kind of tell why this album cover was censored, but it's an album cover that for some people it could be funny. I mean, when I first saw this album cover, I thought I was laughing my ass off that something like this was actually put on print in an album cover and released as a live album, which, if you can find the actual original printing of the album cover, good fucking luck, because I think among Sodom fans or even metal in general, this album cover hasn't been reprinted in his original album cover. Unfortunately, this is one of the album covers that once that once again was censored with the alternative album cover, which just has the logo of Sodom, like a circle in the middle, with, of course, Marley by Life, and of course, kind of more like a vinyl sort of thing. But to the point that this album cover back in 1988 and in Germany, to point that I was reading some articles out there that this kid, this teenager, went to a German school and brought the album, the actual vinyl, which is the one thing on what I mentioned before. The vinyl version, it wasn't uncensored. It was only censored on the CD version, which is kind of peculiar to think that the vinyl wasn't censored, but the CD version wasn't censored. But regardless of that, this kid brings the vinyl to his school and, of course, starts to show it off to, of course, his friends. And his friends thought it was the coolest thing. And long story short, a teacher found out about this album cover, got the attention to the parents. And, of course, the parents were obscured that their child would possess something of pornography or, something like that, which is kind of stupid to think that there's some amazing artworks with a lot of cleavage and debauchery and all that. I mean, if that's the case, you want to fucking arrest Michelangelo for, painting a very graphic, orgy, debauchery kind of paintings and all that. But that's beside the point. To the point that there was a PTA meeting in a school in Germany petitioning to actually ban the album in Germany, which, back in the 80s, could have been possible, being that Germany, once again, has had its rough edges throughout its history. And of course, this almost came to fruition, but of course, somehow, some way, they didn't give enough votes to ban the album, so decided more compromise to censor future releases with, of course, the alternative album cover, which I just mentioned before. And of course, everyone's happy, the fans are happy, society's happy, everyone's happy in some perspective. But the one thing that Sodom did when they released the later releases of the album was to kind of include the album, the original album cover, in the liner notes, which, it's kind of a thing with album artworks and with metal in general. We want the most gruesome, the most evil, the most fucked up album covers you can think of, in its entirety, in its pure form, without being any censorship, anything about that, or something as funny or sexually as this, which, like I mentioned before, a lot of people are hypocrites when it comes to this kind of things. When you go to, like I mentioned, you go to the Vatican, you see stuff like this just because it's some full-on Christian, and this one's more of a paganism, orgy kind of thing. It's kind of redundant that people think that, oh, just because the Sixtine Chapel was painted by, it's in the fucking Vatican, it means a holy thing, and this was painted by something out of nowhere, trying to demonize, art and making it an orgy and all that, which is kind of fucking stupid. But again, just if you kind of look at the album cover real close, you see, goats, cats, dogs, people of, different sizes and shapes, drinking. Like I said, mentioned before, this was an album cover that I didn't know about until like years later when I was getting into Sodom. And it's funny to think that this was actually released like in its entirety at first. And like I mentioned before, if you have the opportunity to find this album cover in its original form, go fucking get it. Either you must be the luckiest son of a bitch in the world or have a shitload of money, because I don't think Sodom, and again, someone might clarify me on this. I don't know if Sodom has reissued this live album, in years later, because honestly, if Sodom were to re-release this album with its original album cover, I would fucking buy it, because, like I mentioned before, the more obscure the album covers, the more we as metalheads want it in our collections and all that. Kind of makes it a good conversation piece, which that's the whole point of having things on physical media, showing up to your friends, to your family, and start a conversation. But like I mentioned before, try and showing this album cover to your most religious family member, and you're gonna think you're a fucking psychopath. You're gonna think you're a fucking sex addict or whatever the fuck, because it's funny to think that, and it's a funny pic, it's a funny artwork, not to make fun of it, but just the fact that Sodom, being a kind of a brutal, thrash metal legends, brutal, kind of have a funny side to them and decide to make something fun out of it, kind of provoke people, which they did the fucking job. But like I mentioned before, the one shot of the album cover that just surprised me the most is the guy holding the horns of goats, and of course you can kind of paint your picture of what he's doing with the goat. But beside to that, Morty Alive is a really good live album to listen to. It's one of the early stages of Sodom becoming what will later become later in Agent Orange, and running consistency of albums to come. But if you have not listened to the album, the live album, or have seen the live performance on YouTube, go give it a listen. It's really funny how the guys were so young and full of energy, and just shocking that this album don't really talked about in terms of live albums, which should be have the more respect, more consistency of why this album should be more appraised in terms of live albums. Of course, like Made in Live After Death or Kiss Alive, or there's a lot of great live albums out there. But regardless, this album cover, it's really funny, sexually, demonic, bestiality, whatever you want to mention, But this album really tests the boundaries of what a German band could do in terms of album covers. Of course, a band like Rammstein years later would have done that in their music videos. But regardless of that, give this album live album and listen. You will fucking love it. And that does it for this video, guys. Hope you really enjoyed this new video. Like I mentioned before, we're just gonna keep going on this series because there's so many live albums that I've yet to talk about. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of albums that even you guys have suggested, which I've done more research on them, and eventually I'm gonna tackle them in future episodes. But like I mentioned before, guys, if you have any suggestions on any album covers you want to talk about, any ideas for new videos, let me know down in the comments. And of course, don't forget to follow me on my Instagram, don't forget to follow me on my Twitter, so you can kind of keep up with me, how I'm doing throughout my life. And like I mentioned before, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe, everyone, and until next time, stay metal.